been told that almost everyone experiences fear in one form or another. Whether it be fear of injections, clowns, or even water, it is quite common for a person to be afraid of something. In my case, it has always been rats. Ever since I was a child, just the thought of their beady eyes and worm-like tails sent shivers down my spine. When I was growing up in rural North Carolina, rats were a frequent occurrence there, and over time I learned to deal with them. It was never easy, but as I moved into adulthood, it became inevitable that I would run into them from time to time. But even then, the sight of them gave me goosebumps. As is typical of humans, I continued to progress along the path we call life. I met a girl, started a family, and eventually set my sights on owning my own home. Thankfully, all of this became a reality, and I found myself moving into a cozy farmhouse in a quiet, unfamiliar town. We even added a few cats to our growing family. Things were going well, and thoughts of those creepy rodents seemed to recede into the background. After all, what were the chances of them showing up when we had our feline friends to protect us? Unfortunately, this optimistic belief was far from the reality I soon had to face. On the third night in our new home, I heard a familiar sound, a quiet scratching in the wall behind my head as I went to bed. Instantly, the hairs on my arms stood up on end as vivid images of these hideous creatures filled my mind. However, just as quickly as it began, the scratching stopped. Hours passed, but there was no further sign of the creature. The only sound in the quiet room was a sigh of relief, after which I was finally able to sleep. The next morning, I told my wife about my nighttime encounter. In her usual manner, she comforted my bruised ego with light-hearted jokes about the situation. Not a few minutes later, the thought of unexpected neighbors receded to the back of my mind as I convinced myself that our beloved cats had surely taken care of the problem. Life went on. I started a new career, our kids went to school, and I spent my free time enjoying horror movies with my favorite streamer on our TV. Life fell back into a calming state of normalcy. Once again, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a familiar, insistent scratching sound. This time, however, it was strangely close, as if the creature was right next to me. Its every movement became frighteningly distinct, from the relentless scratching on the wall to the stomping of tiny feet scurrying back and forth inside the wall. My heart sped up with each audible sound, and I became more and more frightened when I discovered a second source of disturbance, this time coming from the ceiling. It became obvious that I was dealing with more than one intruder. Panic rose in me, and without thinking, I jumped to my feet and began to storm the ceiling, striking furious blows aimed at driving these creatures away. The mere thought that these creatures could break through the ceiling while I slept sent me into a whirlwind of emotions. After several intense minutes of struggling and pounding, I finally achieved a semblance of silence and decided to contact the exterminator in the morning. The next day, the exterminator promptly arrived at my home and assured me that he would quickly resolve the problem, allowing me to enjoy peaceful nights again. I smiled gratefully and let him get to work. In just a couple hours, he had completed his task and even handed me 2 trophies he had retrieved from the attic space above my bedroom, presumably the culprits of what I had encountered the night before. Overwhelmed with relief, I anticipated a night of unbroken sleep. I had all but forgotten about the critters, soothed by the countless traps and baits the exterminator had used. I thought all was well until I heard the disturbing sound of claws digging into the wooden ceiling above me. My eyes widened in horror as I fumbled for the tiles from which the ominous sounds were coming, and my heart jumped when I saw a claw piercing the material. My greatest fear was becoming a reality. A rat was about to burst through the ceiling. In fury, I unleashed a barrage of physical violence on the ceiling, forcing the attic dweller to back away from the noise. I returned to my spot on the bed, vigilant for further signs of intrusion and unaware of what awaited me. The scratching resumed, this time more rapid and consistent. My earlier methods proved futile as the relentless rat continued to claw its way across the tile. And then it happened. I watched in bewilderment as its face appeared through the hole it had been laboring so diligently over. I thought it was smiling at me before I quickly grabbed the remote from the bedside table and threw it at the intruder. I figured it had hidden in the dark corners of the attic, and the noises stopped, allowing me to eventually fall asleep without taking my eyes off the new hole in the ceiling. My sleep was short-lived, however. A couple hours after I fell asleep, I was disturbed by a sharp pain in my stomach. It was the kind of pain that signals that something is seriously wrong. My wife woke up, concerned about my restlessness, and asked what was wrong. I couldn't answer properly because of the pain, so I resorted to repeatedly pointing to my aching stomach. She sat up and ran her hand over my torso, but when she reached just above my navel, she jumped in surprise. At that moment I felt rather than heard it. The scratch had returned.